Hey everybody, welcome back to my S54 build series. My name is Stefan, and this is technically episode 2, where we're going to start by focusing on removing the intake manifold. Be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, so you can stay tuned for the rest of the series as I post the videos. So the first thing I want to go over is the 6 clamps holding the intake manifold, hoses technically, to the throttle bodies. So I've already taken the 6 clamps off to get a good understanding of exactly how they work, because online you can read a lot of things and maybe not quite get it. But basically, here's one of the clamps in good condition that I got off. The others I broke, and I'll show you those in a second, but let's understand how the clamp works first. We can see that we got tons of ridges here and some shark fin looking pieces here, and then inside here we have a little channel. This part of the clamp is ending up following that channel, like so. And then eventually, when the clamp is new and nice and tight, it'll keep going, and keep going until that shark fin locks in, like so, keeping the entire thing locked. So, to get it off, the idea is that you need to create pressure inward like this in order for it to get off of that ridge and come open like that. So with this one, this was on that end of the engine, which I'll show you in a second. It was the easiest one to access. I was able to take needle nose pliers and take this ridge here and this one here, squeeze them together as hard as I could till eventually it just popped open like this, and then I just had to take it off. Others I was not so successful, and I ended up having to bend the crap out of to get them off. So you can see that this is completely lifted up here, this is totally bent sideways, and then some I even had to break off completely in order to get it off without buying BMW's specialty tool. To give an idea of location, this is exactly where the 6 clamps will sit, and just because of all this stuff in the way, obviously some are going to be a lot easier to access, like these, than the ones down over here. So again, the principle is pinching everything tight enough together to the point where this will release. So I just put that back there for illustration, but that is why on some of these over here I ended up breaking them. Now if you want to spend the money on a BMW tool, by all means you can go and buy one, but I just went the barbaric route because I'm going to replace these with hose clamps, adjustable tightening hose clamps, some that kind of look like this, you know, your generic hose clamp, because I'm sure I can find one that'll be the right width, just like this one here. I'm just a little bit bigger one so I can get around here, and then make it so that I can tighten it on the sides here where they're easy to access all the way through. Alright, so let's get into what we actually need to look at to get this intake manifold removed from the engine. This is quite possibly one of the hardest things to do on an engine that is still in a car. So again, I don't have this in a car obviously, but this will give you a good representation of what you need to end up removing if you need to service something in the car. So this crankcase ventilation hose, we've already removed it from when we took our vanity cover off. We can leave this side on, that's optional. This guy, I already removed it here, but we might as well pinch and pull off to get that removed. Obviously you want to take off your 6 clamps that we already discussed. You can leave these ones on. Coming to the back side, we have a 10mm nut right here that will loosen and swivel away our dipstick line and slash hose. SMG guys, you're gonna have this SMG reservoir. I don't have this in a car. I've never had an SMG car, so I don't know where this hose goes. But you're probably going to want to drain this, and if not, leave this hose connected and the other end connected so you don't lose all your fluid or pressure if there's any. Again, I'm not quite sure. Coming down here, you got your big hose here to disconnect. You've got a nut here and a nut here that holds the whole intake manifold to a bracket that you'll have to loosen and take off. This guy is just a rubber mount holding a sensor. This will slide off this way. Down here, you've got another little vent hose down here. You can disconnect that by pinching and pulling right there. And then that's about it. So let's go ahead and take this off. Okay, so now I've got pretty much everything removed that is even remotely attached to the intake manifold. These little nuts at the bottom, right here and here, are 10 millimeter in case you're wondering, just like the oil dipstick piece right here. Again, you can see once you've disconnected everything, kind of pulled things out from where they belong, you can swivel them out of the way, which is kind of a good thing because you're going to be doing now a lot of rocking and tugging to get the intake manifold actually off, because if your intake manifold is like mine and it's kind of never been removed, it's going to be a little bit stuck there. So we're going to have to give it some wiggling up and down while we're pulling away to get it off. And there we go, we got the intake manifold up. So now that we've taken the intake manifold off, you can go ahead and clean that whole thing up, make it shiny, make it beautiful. And we have access to pretty much the rest of this side of the engine now. That's how much that intake manifold box is blocking. So now that the most massive piece of the engine is removed, let's take a closer look at what we have and what we need to remove to kind of follow up on episode 1, which is removing the rest of this wiring harness. I want to get that whole thing off, and it looks like to do so we need to take quite a bit more things off. Alright, so we can see our nice individual throttle bodies here. Mine are a little bit squeaky, so I figure I can lubricate those. I'll take them off if I have to. Don't think I'll need to, but I do want to clean things up. Wiring harness. Looks like it runs all the way back, and then all the wires are stationed within this point. So to get here, I've got a lot of things I can disconnect, wiring related wise, but it does look like it won't be too hard to get out. So I'm gonna go ahead and use a big Allen key, I'll let you know what size in a moment, to remove the the oil cooler lines. Then I'll go into seeing how I can remove the rest of these components. Looks like just a few nuts here to pull that off, since we already disconnected this from the intake manifold box and this from the top, which should clear up more space there. In fact, quite a bit more space. And then take this bolt off here. And then honestly, it looks like I should be able to access all the rest of the wiring there. Again, I do stress, take lots and lots of photos every step of the way, because when you come back to this and you're reassembling things, you're gonna forget where things go. So I stress highly, take lots of photos of everything you're doing. So I'm gonna go ahead and start removing random things. I'm not really gonna go into detail about how to remove these, since once you get the intake manifold box off, it's pretty self-explanatory if you have just a little bit of experience working on cars or your motor. So now that I've disconnected pretty much every electrical connection that I could see, except for up here. Seems like this will be the last one. We'll just have to get this entire rail off is what it's looking like. But aside from that, hopefully you have a good, nice long 5mm Allen or hex head that's not as thick as mine, because this does not fit into here where these 5mm hex bolts are. So I had to loosen mine kind of the ghetto way. But hey, it works. Now they're loose, and now I can go in there with just my standard 5mm and take that out like that. So once that is off, we'll go over here. We'll look at how to get this off. And then we finally have this big old piece of the harness removed from the engine. And I didn't forget about this. If you are ending up removing your oil cooler lines, it is a 6mm hex bit to loosen this screw or this bolt. And once you get that out, you are just going to be pulling it up. And then of course oil does run through this, so keep in mind that most likely if your engine hasn't been totally drained, you're going to be leaking oil out of your oil cooler lines. Now this isn't an alternator removal video just yet, but if we do need to remove it, and in this case, since I'm already accessing the back and taking off the plug here, like so, I also will need to remove the positive cable for it, which will be a 17mm. So I'm going to get that off, and then for the most part I'll have everything off finally, except for up here. So now that I've got most of it off here, the kind of tedious part about this is does look like we're going to have to remove the plugs pretty much for the injectors. So to do that, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, obviously. Now if you look closely in there, there's that little clip that I've kind of moved off to the sides. Here, this is what it should look like right there. If you look, there's two pieces kind of clamped on to the square part of the connector. Just like this one here, I've moved them off to the side. I'm doing this with a flathead, moving one side off then the other, which is going to be very tedious because sometimes it'll swing back on one side or the other. So just be very slow, be very careful, and do your very best not to drop one of those springs down there, especially if you're working on your engine in the car still, because you will lose it forever and it's a pain in the butt to get it back on unless you take everything off and then put it back on, you know, after you've removed everything. So once all those are loosened, we'll be able to kind of pull this rail off a little bit and then disconnect this, and the whole wiring harness will be free. There's also some connectors on this side, so let's not forget those when we're pulling everything off, and then a zip tie that we got to cut here. But after this connector, and this connector, we have the whole harness off. All right. Okay, once you've pulled things off, the last thing to know is that you have a connector right here to disconnect, because it will connect to a sensor right there. You can either take that off, but since I got all this plastic in the way, I'm not going to deal with that. I'm just going to disconnect it right here, pop it out of these little tabs, because that's a lot easier to do. So taking a closer look at how these work so you get a better idea, this is exactly what I'm saying, where actually one I already clipped back on accident here, right here. See how that's attached like that? It's basically just a locking snap ring. So we want to move one side off tediously. That's why I say do it very slowly, and then you're going to want to get the other side off, so that way this metal bar, the actual ring itself, doesn't lock into these edges of the connector, which end up actually holding it to each injector. So after all that we have so much more space in the engine, and just like, it's just looking pretty bare. I mean, honestly, aside from all the wiring, it's pretty simple. So there we go. We got another wiring harness removed, as well as everything else we've removed from the car so far. So now that we're almost done, really, there's not much left. It's all pretty self-explanatory. I'll still go through it, of course, but we're gonna remove the little dipstick here, you know, replace those gaskets and stuff down the line. After everything is cleaned and washed, we'll leave the engine mount on, honestly, because it just needs a wash. There's no reason for me to pull it off. Obviously, I'll just check the tightness on the bolts there. Lines like this, just clean everything up, because at this point, it's pretty bare. You know, I think this is fine, so I'm not going to be replacing this. I'll just lube up some stuff so it moves more free. The alternator we will get off. The oil filter reservoir we will take off. We'll get to those on probably the next episode, and then start moving on to this side, taking off the actual valve cover, not just the vanity cover, taking out spark plugs, ignition coils. I'm personally going to delete the EGR system and the secondary air pump, so I'm going to take that off since it's going to be a race car. We'll take off all of this, air conditioning, and these pulleys and whatnot, since we're going to change them. So with that said, we have finally got the intake manifold off and the second wiring harness that we couldn't get off in episode 1 because the intake manifold was in the way. So with those off, we have so much more access to whatever's left on the engine, which honestly isn't that much. But episode 3, I'm probably going to start removing pulleys, alternator, air conditioning, and I'm going to save the valve cover for last because I'm just doing a gasket on that one, so that's going to be pretty easy. So that also includes the spark plugs, ignition coils, and whatnot that get taken off. I'm going to save that for later. But eventually, before that, I'm going to rotate the engine to the other side, and we're going to work on the rod bearings. So don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification bell, stay tuned for the latest videos. I'll see you guys on the next one.